Question 1. Performance analysis shows a consistent backlog in processing customer inquiries, impacting key service level agreements. A proposed solution involves streamlining the data verification process by reducing the number of mandatory checks, with the expectation that this will significantly improve throughput. Option A. Implement the proposed streamlining immediately to address the backlog, with a plan to conduct a post-implementation compliance review. Option B. Rely on the team's experience to identify the most critical verification steps to retain, and proceed with the reduction of others. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed streamlining against all relevant data protection and customer service regulations, and assess potential risks before implementation. Option D. Prioritize meeting the service level agreements by implementing the streamlining, and address any compliance concerns that arise later. The correct answer is A. Implement the proposed streamlining immediately to address the backlog, with a plan to conduct a post-implementation compliance review. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient service delivery with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The pressure to meet performance metrics can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that operational efficiency does not come at the expense of customer protection and data integrity, which are paramount in regulated environments. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and documented review of the process against established regulatory frameworks. This ensures that any identified deviations are addressed systematically and in accordance with legal and ethical obligations. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of due diligence and accountability, demonstrating a commitment to maintaining a compliant and trustworthy operational environment. This proactive stance helps prevent potential breaches and fosters a culture of compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate performance improvement without a compliance review risks violating data privacy regulations. For instance, if the performance analysis suggests a faster method for handling customer data that bypasses necessary verification steps, this could lead to unauthorized access or disclosure, contravening data protection laws. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or informal feedback, without a formal risk assessment or regulatory check, could introduce systemic vulnerabilities or non-compliance issues that are difficult to trace and rectify later. This demonstrates a failure in risk management and a disregard for established compliance protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates performance objectives with a robust compliance and risk management process. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to the operations. 2. Identifying performance gaps and potential solutions. 3. Conducting a thorough risk assessment for each proposed solution, evaluating its impact on compliance, data security, and ethical considerations. 4. Documenting the assessment and the rationale for the chosen approach. 5. Implementing changes with ongoing monitoring and regular audits to ensure sustained compliance. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates that the implementation of a new automated data processing system for client onboarding is experiencing delays due to frequent data validation errors. The project team is under pressure to go live by the end of the quarter. Which of the following approaches best addresses this implementation challenge while adhering to professional standards for data integrity and operational efficiency? Option A. Develop and implement a comprehensive data validation framework with automated checks and a clear process for investigating and resolving identified discrepancies before full system deployment. Option B. Rely on manual data correction by the operations team after the system is live, assuming that most errors will be minor and self-correcting. Option C. Implement the system with a temporary waiver on certain data validation rules to meet the go-live deadline, with a plan to address the discrepancies post-launch. Option D. Prioritize the go-live date by bypassing all non-critical data validation checks and focusing solely on the core processing logic. Correct answer is C. Implement the system with a temporary waiver on certain data validation rules to meet the go-live deadline, with a plan to address the discrepancies post-launch. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of data integrity and regulatory compliance. The pressure to deliver results quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise the accuracy and reliability of the data, which in turn can have significant consequences for reporting, decision-making, and adherence to Concentrix's internal policies and any applicable external regulations. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with data handling and processing in a high-volume, fast-paced environment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and systematic method for identifying and addressing potential data quality issues before they impact downstream processes or reporting. This aligns with best professional practices in data management and quality assurance. It involves establishing clear data validation rules, implementing automated checks where possible, and having a defined process for investigating and rectifying discrepancies. This approach ensures that data is not only processed efficiently, but also accurately and reliably, thereby upholding the integrity of information used for business operations and client reporting. This is crucial for maintaining client trust and meeting any contractual obligations related to data accuracy. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing speed of processing over data accuracy. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the principle of data integrity. In a regulated environment, inaccurate data can lead to misreporting, non-compliance with data protection laws, if applicable to the specific data being handled, and flawed business decisions. It undermines the reliability of the information Concentrix provides to its clients and internally. Another incorrect approach is to assume that all data inputs are inherently accurate and require no validation. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to implement basic quality control measures. It exposes the organization to significant risks of errors propagating through systems, leading to incorrect outcomes and potential reputational damage. This approach neglects the fundamental responsibility to ensure the quality of the information being handled. A third incorrect approach is to only address data discrepancies when they are explicitly flagged by a client or a downstream system. This reactive stance is insufficient. It allows errors to persist and potentially cause harm before they are identified. Best professional practice dictates a proactive approach to data quality, where potential issues are anticipated and prevented or identified early through systematic checks and balances. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to data handling. This involves understanding the potential impact of data errors on business operations, client relationships, and regulatory compliance. When faced with implementation challenges, the decision-making process should prioritize the establishment of robust data validation and quality assurance mechanisms. This includes defining clear data standards, implementing automated checks, training personnel on data handling best practices, and establishing a clear escalation and resolution process for data anomalies. The focus should always be on ensuring the accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of data, even under pressure to deliver quickly. Question 3. Analysis of the implementation of a new customer relationship management (CRM) system within a financial services organization, focusing on ensuring compliance with data protection regulations. The project team is under pressure to launch the system by a specific deadline to meet market demands. What is the most appropriate approach to balance the urgency of implementation with the imperative of regulatory compliance? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) and obtain independent validation of the CRM system's compliance with all relevant data privacy laws before proceeding with the full rollout. Option B. Initiate the CRM system implementation, but postpone any detailed data protection compliance checks until after the initial launch phase to avoid delaying the project timeline. Option C. Proceed with the CRM system's implementation as scheduled, relying on the organization's general data protection policies to cover the new system's operations. Option D. Implement the CRM system immediately and address any data protection compliance issues that arise post-launch through reactive measures. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) and obtain independent validation of the CRM system's compliance with all relevant data privacy laws before proceeding with the full rollout. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between achieving business objectives and adhering to regulatory compliance, particularly concerning data privacy and security. The need to implement a new system while ensuring it meets stringent data protection standards requires careful planning, risk assessment, and stakeholder communication. The professional challenge lies in balancing the urgency of implementation with the non-negotiable requirement of regulatory adherence, avoiding shortcuts that could lead to significant legal, financial, and reputational damage. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough risk assessment and compliance validation before full implementation. This aligns with the principles of data protection regulations, which mandate that organizations implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure the security of personal data. By conducting a comprehensive review of the new system's compliance with data privacy laws, including data minimization, purpose limitation, and consent mechanisms, the organization demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of breaches, unauthorized access, or misuse of personal data, thereby safeguarding customer trust and avoiding regulatory penalties. It embodies a risk-based approach to compliance, ensuring that potential issues are identified and mitigated early in the implementation lifecycle. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with implementation without a full compliance review is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a direct violation of data protection principles, such as the requirement for data security by design and by default. It exposes the organization to significant regulatory scrutiny and potential fines for noncompliance. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume existing compliance measures are sufficient without specific validation for the new system, is also a critical failure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the unique data processing activities the new system will undertake. It can lead to unforeseen vulnerabilities and noncompliance, as the new system might process data in ways not covered by previous compliance assessments. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay implementation indefinitely due to minor compliance concerns, is also professionally unsound. While compliance is paramount, an indefinite delay without a clear plan for remediation can hinder business operations and innovation, and may not be a proportionate response to minor issues. Best practice involves identifying, assessing, and actively working to resolve compliance gaps within a reasonable timeframe. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to the data being processed. This involves identifying all applicable data protection laws and guidelines. Next, a thorough risk assessment should be conducted, evaluating the potential impact of the new system on data privacy and security. This assessment should inform the development of a compliance strategy, outlining the steps necessary to meet regulatory requirements. Continuous monitoring and auditing throughout the implementation process are crucial to ensure ongoing adherence. Finally, clear communication channels with legal, compliance, and IT teams, as well as senior management, are essential for informed decision-making and effective risk management. Question 4. The control framework reveals a potential gap in the onboarding process for new hires, specifically concerning the verification of essential documentation. While the current process is functional, there is a perception among the recruitment team that it is time-consuming and could be streamlined to accelerate candidate entry into the system. The team is proposing a revised process that involves less stringent verification steps to improve efficiency. Which of the following represents the most professionally sound approach to address this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough review and risk assessment of the proposed streamlined verification process, including testing its effectiveness against regulatory requirements and internal policies before implementation. Option B. Rely solely on the recruitment team's anecdotal feedback about the current process being time-consuming to justify the immediate adoption of the proposed changes. Option C. Immediately implement the proposed streamlined verification process, as efficiency gains are critical for meeting hiring targets, and address any control issues that may arise later. Option D. Implement the streamlined verification process and then conduct a post-implementation review, assuming that any significant control deficiencies will be immediately apparent. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review and risk assessment of the proposed streamlined verification process, including testing its effectiveness against regulatory requirements and internal policies, before implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of maintaining robust internal controls, particularly in a regulated environment like that governed by the Concentrix hiring assessment test's implied jurisdiction, which we will assume for this exercise aligns with general principles of financial services regulation, such as those found in the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, FCA handbook, or similar frameworks. The pressure to onboard candidates quickly can lead to shortcuts that undermine the integrity of the hiring process, and by extension, the firm's compliance posture. Careful judgment is needed to identify and mitigate risks without unduly hindering business objectives. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented review of the control framework's effectiveness before implementing significant changes. This aligns with regulatory expectations for a proactive and risk-based approach to internal controls. Specifically, it demonstrates adherence to principles of good governance, accountability, and due diligence. By ensuring that controls are adequately designed and tested, the firm minimizes the risk of operational failures, regulatory breaches, and reputational damage. This approach is ethically sound as it upholds the integrity of the hiring process and ensures that individuals are assessed fairly and against appropriate standards, contributing to a culture of compliance. An incorrect approach that bypasses a formal review of the control framework before implementation is professionally unacceptable due to specific regulatory and ethical failures. It risks introducing new vulnerabilities or exacerbating existing ones without proper assessment, potentially leading to breaches of regulations requiring adequate systems and controls, e.g. SISC. In the FCA handbook, this failure to conduct due diligence can result in inadequate segregation of duties, insufficient data security, or biased assessment processes, all of which can have serious compliance implications. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for established risk management protocols, which is ethically questionable as it prioritizes expediency over responsible operational management. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal feedback without structured testing or validation is also professionally unacceptable. While feedback is valuable, it is not a substitute for objective assessment of control design and operating effectiveness. This can lead to decisions based on incomplete or biased information, potentially overlooking critical control gaps or implementing ineffective solutions. This approach fails to meet the regulatory requirement for robust and demonstrable control assurance. Ethically, it can lead to unfair outcomes if the feedback is not representative or if the implemented changes inadvertently create new disadvantages. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This includes identifying potential control weaknesses, evaluating the likelihood and impact of identified risks, and then designing and implementing controls that are proportionate to the risks. Before any significant operational change, a formal review of the existing control framework should be conducted to understand its current state and identify any potential impacts of the proposed change. This review should be documented and involve relevant stakeholders. Post-implementation, ongoing monitoring and testing are crucial to ensure the continued effectiveness of controls. This iterative process of assessment, implementation, and monitoring is fundamental to maintaining a strong control environment and ensuring regulatory compliance. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that a new, unproven trading algorithm could significantly reduce transaction costs for a key client. However, the algorithm's performance metrics are based on back-tested data only, and there is no real-world track record. The client is eager to implement it immediately to capture potential savings. Option A. Proceed with implementing the algorithm immediately as requested by the client. Given their eagerness and the potential for cost savings, assuming the back-tested results are sufficiently indicative of future performance. Option B. Advise the client against using the algorithm due to the lack of real-world performance data, suggesting they stick to established, albeit less efficient, methods. Option C. Recommend implementing the algorithm after conducting a thorough review of its backtesting methodology and potential risks, and clearly communicating these to the client, while also exploring a phased implementation or a pilot program to monitor real-world performance. Option D. Implement the algorithm and focus on managing the client's expectations regarding its performance, without explicitly detailing the limitations of the backtested data. Correct answer is C. Recommend implementing the algorithm after conducting a thorough review of its backtesting methodology and potential risks, and clearly communicating these to the client, while also exploring a phased implementation or a pilot program to monitor real-world performance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it forces a decision between immediate, potentially beneficial outcomes for a client and adherence to ethical principles and regulatory guidelines designed for broader market integrity and fairness. The pressure to deliver results quickly, coupled with the potential for personal gain or recognition, can create a conflict of interest and tempt individuals to overlook or rationalize minor ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to balance client needs with professional responsibilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency, fairness, and adherence to the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements. By seeking clarification and ensuring all actions are compliant, the professional upholds their duty to the client, the integrity of the financial markets, and their own professional reputation. This aligns with the fundamental ethical principles of honesty, integrity, and due diligence expected of professionals operating within regulated environments. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding without full understanding or seeking external validation risks violating regulatory frameworks. For instance, misinterpreting or selectively applying guidelines can lead to actions that are technically non-compliant, even if not intentionally fraudulent. This could result in regulatory sanctions, damage to client relationships, and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach, such as prioritizing personal gain or expediency over ethical considerations, directly contravenes principles of fiduciary duty and conflicts of interest, potentially leading to severe professional consequences. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured approach. First, identify the ethical and regulatory considerations. Second, gather all relevant facts and seek clarification from appropriate sources, supervisors, compliance departments, or regulatory bodies. Third, evaluate potential courses of action against ethical principles and regulatory requirements. And fourth, choose the course of action that best upholds professional integrity and compliance, even if it requires more time or effort. Question 6. Research into data privacy regulations and internal company policies reveals that an employee has inadvertently accessed sensitive financial information belonging to a client that indicates a significant impending financial loss for that client. The employee is not authorized to directly communicate with the client about such matters or to act on this information independently. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee? Option A. Ignore the information and continue with their assigned tasks, as it is outside their scope of responsibility. Option B. Discuss the sensitive client information with a trusted colleague in a different department to get their opinion on the situation. Option C. Immediately report the findings to their direct supervisor or the designated compliance officer, detailing the information discovered and requesting guidance on how to proceed. Option D. Directly contact the client to inform them of the potential financial loss and advise them on steps to take. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the findings to their direct supervisor or the designated compliance officer, detailing the information discovered and requesting guidance on how to proceed. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client confidentiality with the potential for harm. The employee has discovered information that, if acted upon, could prevent significant financial loss for the client, but doing so without explicit authorization could violate data privacy regulations and internal company policies. The core of the dilemma lies in determining the appropriate course of action when personal ethical considerations, preventing harm, conflict with professional obligations, confidentiality, and adherence to procedures. The correct approach involves escalating the issue through established internal channels. This represents best professional practice because it adheres to regulatory frameworks that mandate data protection and client confidentiality. By reporting the findings to a supervisor or designated compliance officer, the employee ensures that the situation is handled by individuals authorized to make decisions regarding data access and client communication. This process respects the client's privacy rights, as outlined in data protection laws, and upholds the company's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. It allows for a structured and authorized response that mitigates risks for both the client and the company. An incorrect approach would be to directly contact the client with the discovered information. This action constitutes a breach of confidentiality and potentially violates data privacy regulations. It bypasses established protocols for client communication and data handling, exposing the company to legal and reputational damage. Furthermore, it assumes the employee has the authority and expertise to interpret the information and advise the client, which is likely outside their defined role and could lead to miscommunication or unintended consequences. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and take no action. This is ethically problematic as it allows a known risk to persist, potentially leading to significant client losses. While it avoids a direct breach of confidentiality, it fails to uphold the professional responsibility to act in the client's best interest when feasible and within ethical boundaries. This inaction could be seen as negligence, especially if the employee had a reasonable opportunity to report the issue. A third incorrect approach would be to discuss the findings with colleagues not involved in the client's account or without a need to know. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure of sensitive client information, violating confidentiality agreements and data protection laws. It creates unnecessary risk of further breaches and undermines the trust placed in the employee and the company. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Identifying the ethical and regulatory conflict. 2. Consulting internal policies and procedures regarding data handling and client communication. 3. Escalating the issue to a supervisor or compliance department for guidance and authorization. 4. Acting only upon explicit instruction from authorized personnel. This structured approach ensures that all actions are compliant, ethical, and in the best interest of all parties involved. Question 7. Cost-benefit analysis shows that correcting a minor data entry error that slightly inflates a performance metric would require significant time and resources, potentially impacting team targets. However, not correcting it could lead to a misrepresentation of performance to a client. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Proceed with the current data. The error is minor, and the time/resource cost of correction outweighs the potential benefit of a perfectly accurate metric. Option B. Discuss the situation with the team to collectively decide whether to correct the error, prioritizing team performance over absolute accuracy in this instance. Option C. Immediately report the potential data entry error to the relevant supervisor or compliance team for review and correction, regardless of the perceived impact on targets. Option D. Attempt to discreetly correct the error without informing anyone, hoping it goes unnoticed and avoids impacting team targets. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the potential data entry error to the relevant supervisor or compliance team for review and correction, regardless of the perceived impact on targets. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits potential short-term financial gains against long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets, coupled with the perceived leniency of a minor infraction, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay ethical considerations. Careful judgment is required to navigate this conflict and ensure that actions align with professional integrity and legal requirements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and adherence to regulatory frameworks. By immediately reporting the potential misstatement, even if it appears minor, the professional upholds the principle of honesty and integrity, which are foundational to the Concentrix hiring assessment test's ethical guidelines. This proactive disclosure prevents potential future complications, demonstrates accountability, and ensures that financial reporting remains accurate and compliant with relevant regulations, such as those governing data integrity and client confidentiality. An incorrect approach that involves ignoring the discrepancy or attempting to correct it without proper disclosure fails to meet professional standards. Ignoring the issue constitutes a breach of integrity and a potential violation of internal policies designed to ensure accurate reporting. Attempting to correct it without disclosure could be seen as an attempt to conceal a prior oversight, which undermines trust and could lead to more severe consequences if discovered later. Both actions risk violating the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements that mandate accurate and truthful representation of information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the ethical and regulatory implications of any situation. This involves consulting relevant company policies, codes of conduct, and applicable regulations. When faced with a potential discrepancy, the immediate step should be to gather all relevant facts and assess the potential impact. If there is any doubt or potential for misstatement, the most ethical and professionally sound course of action is to escalate the issue through the appropriate channels for review and resolution, rather than attempting to manage it independently or ignore it. This ensures that decisions are made with full awareness of the consequences and in alignment with established professional and legal standards. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that clients often value perceived high performance. Your direct manager, under pressure to meet quarterly targets, asks you to subtly adjust the reporting of customer satisfaction scores to present a more favorable, albeit slightly exaggerated, picture of service delivery for an upcoming client review. You know that these adjustments would not be outright fabrications, but would involve emphasizing positive feedback and downplaying less favorable comments to create a more optimistic narrative. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Remain silent and proceed with the reporting as requested, hoping that the subtle adjustments will not be noticed and that the positive outcome will outweigh any potential ethical concerns. Option B. Immediately escalate the issue to senior management or the compliance department without first discussing your concerns with your direct manager. Option C. Politely decline the request to inflate the metrics, explaining that you are committed to providing accurate and transparent data, and offer to present the raw, unadjusted scores along with a clear explanation of any nuances or areas for improvement. Option D. Agree to the manager's request, believing that a slight exaggeration is acceptable for client relations and will ultimately benefit the company by securing continued business. The correct answer is C. Politely decline the request to inflate the metrics, explaining that you are committed to providing accurate and transparent data, and offer to present the raw, unadjusted scores along with a clear explanation of any nuances or areas for improvement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to accurately represent its services. The pressure to meet performance targets, coupled with the temptation to misrepresent data, creates an ethical tightrope. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising integrity or violating professional standards. The correct approach, which involves politely but firmly declining to inflate performance metrics and instead offering to provide accurate data, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the ethical principles of honesty, integrity, and transparency. Specifically, it upholds the duty to provide truthful information to clients and stakeholders, as expected in professional conduct guidelines. It also demonstrates a commitment to building long-term trust based on factual reporting, rather than short-term gains derived from misleading information. An incorrect approach that involves agreeing to the inflated metrics would constitute a direct violation of professional ethics and potentially regulatory guidelines concerning fair representation and truthful advertising. This action would erode trust, damage the company's reputation, and could lead to legal repercussions if the misrepresentation is discovered. Another incorrect approach, which is to remain silent and hope the issue is not discovered, is also ethically deficient. This passive complicity allows unethical practices to persist and fails to uphold the professional responsibility to act with integrity. It can be seen as a form of tacit approval of the misleading behavior. A third incorrect approach, which is to immediately report the manager without attempting to resolve the issue internally first, might be seen as overly aggressive and could damage team cohesion. While reporting is a necessary step if the unethical behavior continues, a more measured initial response that seeks to educate and correct is often preferred in professional settings, provided it does not compromise ethical obligations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of ethical codes and company policies. First, assess the situation and identify the ethical conflict. Second, consider the potential consequences of each course of action. Third, consult relevant ethical guidelines and seek advice from a trusted senior colleague or ethics officer if unsure. Fourth, choose the action that best upholds integrity, honesty, and transparency, even if it is the more difficult path. Finally, document the situation and the decision-making process. Question 9. Which approach would be most appropriate for an employee who suspects a colleague is engaging in fraudulent activities that could violate company policy and financial regulations? Option A. Ignore the suspicion to avoid potential workplace conflict and personal repercussions. Option B. Confront the colleague directly to gather more information before deciding on any action. Option C. Document the observations and report the suspicion through the company's designated whistleblowing channel or to their direct manager. Option D. Immediately report the suspicion to the relevant regulatory body without informing internal management. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the suspicion to the relevant regulatory body without informing internal management. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the obligation to report potential illegal activity. The employee is privy to information that, if true, could have significant legal and financial repercussions for the company and its stakeholders. Navigating this requires a careful balance of ethical duties and adherence to regulatory frameworks. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to the company's whistleblowing policy and relevant regulatory guidelines for reporting suspected misconduct. This demonstrates integrity and a commitment to upholding legal and ethical standards. By following the established reporting channels, the employee ensures that the information is handled by the appropriate internal or external bodies, who are equipped to investigate and act upon it without compromising their own position or the integrity of the investigation. This aligns with principles of corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which mandate reporting mechanisms for suspected wrongdoing. An incorrect approach that involves direct confrontation with the colleague without following established procedures risks several regulatory and ethical failures, could lead to the destruction of evidence, tipping off the individual involved, and potentially creating a hostile work environment. Furthermore, bypassing internal reporting mechanisms might violate company policy and could be seen as an attempt to handle a serious matter unilaterally, which is often discouraged in regulated environments. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the information, constitutes a failure to act responsibly and could lead to complicity in illegal activities, violating both ethical codes and potentially legal obligations to report. This inaction can have severe consequences for the company and its reputation. Professionals facing such dilemmas should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Identifying the ethical and regulatory obligations at play. 2. Consulting relevant company policies, such as whistleblowing procedures. 3. Seeking guidance from a trusted supervisor, HR, or legal counsel if unsure about the correct course of action. 4. Documenting all steps taken in communications. 5. Acting with discretion and professionalism throughout the process. Question 10. The review process indicates that a hiring manager has a close personal friendship with one of the candidates being considered for a critical role. The manager believes they can remain objective, but the friendship is well known within the department. What is the most appropriate course of action for the hiring manager? Option A. Subtly advocate for their friend during the evaluation process, highlighting their strengths while downplaying any weaknesses. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation as planned, confident in their ability to remain objective and make the best decision for the company. Option C. Avoid any direct involvement in the candidate's evaluation and leave the decision entirely to other members of the hiring panel without any disclosure. Option D. Disclose the personal relationship to HR or a superior and recuse themselves from the evaluation and decision-making process for that specific candidate. The correct answer is D. Disclose the personal relationship to HR or a superior and recuse themselves from the evaluation and decision-making process for that specific candidate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between a personal relationship and the obligation to maintain objectivity and confidentiality in a hiring process. The hiring manager is aware of a potential conflict of interest due to their friendship with one of the candidates. Navigating this requires careful judgment to ensure fairness, integrity, and compliance with Concentrix's hiring policies and relevant employment laws, which generally mandate impartiality and the avoidance of undue influence. The correct approach is to disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate authority, e.g., HR or a superior, and recuse oneself from the decision-making process for that specific candidate. This upholds best professional practice by prioritizing transparency, fairness, and the integrity of the hiring process. It aligns with ethical principles of impartiality and avoiding conflicts of interest, as well as potential regulatory requirements that demand unbiased hiring decisions. By disclosing and recusing, the manager demonstrates a commitment to a merit-based selection process, protecting both the company and the candidates from perceived or actual bias. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with evaluating the friend without disclosure, potentially leading to preferential treatment or the appearance of it. This violates the ethical duty of impartiality and could breach company policy regarding conflicts of interest. It also risks undermining the credibility of the hiring process and could lead to legal challenges if the unsuccessful candidates believe the process was unfair. Another incorrect approach is to subtly steer the evaluation in favor of the friend, even without explicit bias. This is a form of manipulation that compromises professional integrity and is ethically indefensible, as it distorts the objective assessment of qualifications. Finally, ignoring the relationship and proceeding as if it doesn't exist is also an incorrect approach, as it fails to acknowledge and manage a known conflict of interest, leaving the process vulnerable to bias and ethical compromise. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. Once identified, the next step is to consult company policies and relevant ethical guidelines. Transparency and disclosure to the appropriate parties are paramount. If a conflict exists, recusal from the decision-making process concerning the conflicted party is the most responsible action. This framework ensures that decisions are made objectively and ethically, maintaining trust and fairness within the organization. Question 11. The analysis reveals that a long-standing client, who represents a significant portion of your team's revenue, has requested that you deliberately omit certain negative performance indicators from a quarterly report that will be shared with their stakeholders. The client argues that these indicators are minor and will unfairly damage their reputation, and that your team has always been flexible in the past. You are aware that omitting this information would be a misrepresentation of the actual performance data. Option A. Politely but firmly refuse the client's request, explaining that providing accurate and complete information is a core ethical and professional obligation, and that misrepresenting data would violate regulatory guidelines and compromise the integrity of the reporting process. Offer to discuss alternative ways to present the data that might provide context without omitting critical information. Option B. Proceed with the client's request to omit the negative indicators, as the client is a significant revenue source and has historically valued your team's flexibility. Option C. Inform the client that you cannot fulfill their request and immediately escalate the issue to your manager without attempting to discuss alternative reporting methods with the client. Option D. Omit the negative indicators but add a vague disclaimer in the report that certain data points have been excluded for brevity, hoping the client's stakeholders will not inquire further. The correct answer is A. Politely but firmly refuse the client's request, explaining that providing accurate and complete information is a core ethical and professional obligation, and that misrepresenting data would violate regulatory guidelines and compromise the integrity of the reporting process. Offer to discuss alternative ways to present the data that might provide context without omitting critical information. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit, albeit potentially misguided, request and the professional's duty to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The pressure to satisfy a client, especially one who is a significant source of business, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay ethical concerns. The professional must exercise sound judgment to navigate this situation, balancing client relationships with their professional obligations. The correct approach involves a direct, yet diplomatic, refusal to comply with the unethical request, coupled with a clear explanation of the regulatory and ethical reasons behind this refusal. This demonstrates integrity and adherence to the Concentrix hiring assessment test's implied ethical framework, which prioritizes compliance and responsible conduct. By explaining the potential negative consequences of the requested action, the professional educates the client and reinforces the importance of ethical business practices, thereby upholding the reputation of both themselves and Concentrix. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's request without question. This directly violates the ethical principles of honesty and integrity, and potentially breaches regulatory guidelines that prohibit misleading or deceptive practices. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly circumvent the request without a clear refusal or explanation. This can lead to misunderstandings, damage trust, and still expose the professional and Concentrix to ethical and regulatory scrutiny. Third incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's concerns entirely without offering any alternative or explanation, which, while avoiding direct unethical action, fails to demonstrate professional responsibility and client care. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the ethical conflict. They should then consult relevant internal policies and external regulations. A direct, honest, and respectful communication with the client is crucial, explaining the boundaries and the rationale for them. If possible, offering alternative, ethical solutions demonstrates a commitment to finding a mutually acceptable path forward. This structured approach ensures that decisions are not made impulsively, but are grounded in ethical principles and regulatory requirements. Question 12. Process analysis reveals a potential for significant efficiency gains by reconfiguring a critical customer service workflow. However, the team proposing the change is concerned about the immediate impact on live operations and potential resistance from frontline staff who are comfortable with the current system. They have gathered data suggesting the new process will reduce average handling time by 15% and improve customer satisfaction scores. What is the most professionally sound approach to implementing this process optimization? Option A. Focus on creating detailed documentation and training materials for the new process, assuming staff will adopt it once they understand the theoretical benefits. Option B. Immediately implement the new workflow across all customer service operations to realize the projected efficiency gains as quickly as possible. Option C. Conduct a pilot program of the new workflow with a small, representative segment of customer interactions to gather real-world data and feedback before a full rollout. Option D. Escalate the proposed changes to senior management for a decision, highlighting the potential benefits and risks without further internal testing. The correct answer is C. Conduct a pilot program of the new workflow with a small, representative segment of customer interactions to gather real-world data and feedback before a full rollout. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where a team identifies a potential improvement, but faces resistance due to perceived disruption and a lack of clear benefit articulation. The professional challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency with the need for stakeholder buy-in and minimizing negative impacts on operational continuity. It requires not just technical understanding of process improvement, but also strong communication, change management, and risk assessment skills. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation with a pilot program. This represents best professional practice because it allows for controlled testing of the proposed optimization in a real-world setting without immediately disrupting the entire operation. It provides tangible data to demonstrate the benefits and identify unforeseen issues. This aligns with principles of responsible innovation and risk mitigation, ensuring that changes are data-driven and have a higher likelihood of successful adoption. It also allows for iterative refinement based on pilot feedback, which is a cornerstone of effective process management, and aligns with continuous improvement methodologies often embedded in regulatory expectations for operational efficiency and compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the change immediately without testing would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It disregards the potential for unintended consequences that could lead to service disruptions, data integrity issues, or non-compliance with service-level agreements, SLAs, or data handling regulations. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and risk management. Escalating the issue to senior management without attempting any form of validation or pilot testing is also professionally unsound. While escalation is sometimes necessary, doing so prematurely bypasses opportunities for problem-solving at the operational level and can be perceived as an inability to manage challenges independently. It fails to demonstrate a proactive and solution-oriented mindset, which is expected in professional roles. Focusing solely on the theoretical benefits without any practical demonstration or stakeholder engagement is another failure. This approach neglects the human element of change and the practical realities of implementation. It can lead to resistance, lack of adoption, and ultimately, the failure of the optimization effort, potentially resulting in wasted resources and a missed opportunity for genuine improvement. This can indirectly lead to regulatory issues if the failure to optimize impacts compliance or service delivery standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization by first thoroughly understanding the current state, identifying pain points, and then proposing solutions. The decision-making process should involve assessing the potential impact of any proposed change, including risks and benefits. A phased approach, starting with a pilot or proof of concept, is often the most prudent method. This allows for data collection, stakeholder feedback, and iterative refinement before full-scale deployment. Effective communication and change management strategies are crucial throughout the process to ensure buy-in and smooth transition. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a key customer service process is experiencing a higher-than-average resolution time, impacting customer satisfaction scores. Management is pushing for immediate improvements to reduce operational costs. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for rapid improvement with regulatory compliance and long-term process integrity? Option A. Adopt a competitor's publicly documented process optimization strategy without assessing its applicability or compliance with the organization's specific regulatory obligations and operational context. Option B. Implement a new, unproven software solution that promises faster ticket handling without a thorough review of its data security protocols or integration with existing compliance reporting mechanisms. Option C. Introduce a temporary manual workaround to expedite ticket closures, deferring any formal process review or system updates until the current backlog is cleared, disregarding existing documentation standards. Option D. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the current process, mapping workflows, identifying bottlenecks, and evaluating potential solutions against established performance metrics and relevant regulatory guidelines before proposing changes. The correct answer is B. Implement a new, unproven software solution that promises faster ticket handling without a thorough review of its data security protocols or integration with existing compliance reporting mechanisms. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where immediate cost savings might conflict with long-term efficiency and compliance. The professional challenge lies in balancing the pressure for rapid results with the need for thorough, compliant, and sustainable process improvements. A hasty decision could lead to regulatory breaches, operational disruptions, and reputational damage. The correct approach prioritizes a systematic, data-driven, and compliant methodology. It involves understanding the current state, identifying root causes of inefficiency, and then designing and implementing solutions that not only improve performance, but also adhere to all relevant regulatory frameworks. This ensures that optimization efforts are robust, defensible, and contribute to the organization's overall integrity and long-term success. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on superficial changes without understanding underlying issues is professionally unacceptable. It risks overlooking critical control points or compliance requirements, potentially leading to regulatory violations. For instance, implementing a new workflow without validating its alignment with data privacy regulations, e.g., GDPR, if applicable to the Concentrix assessment context, would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Similarly, bypassing established change management protocols, which are often designed to ensure compliance and minimize disruption, demonstrates a disregard for organizational governance and risk management. Another incorrect approach might involve adopting a solution based on anecdotal evidence or industry trends without specific validation for the organization's unique context and regulatory environment, leading to ineffective or non-compliant outcomes. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of objectives and constraints, including regulatory requirements. This involves gathering data, analyzing root causes, evaluating potential solutions against defined criteria, including compliance and efficiency, piloting and testing, and finally, implementing and monitoring. This iterative and evidence-based approach minimizes risk and maximizes the likelihood of successful and compliant process optimization. Question 14. During the evaluation of a proposed process optimization that promises increased efficiency, a team identifies a potential improvement to a critical client-facing workflow. However, some team members express concerns about the disruption the change might cause to ongoing operations and the immediate client service levels, while others are eager to implement it quickly to impress the client with rapid problem-solving. The client has also expressed a desire for swift resolution of any identified issues. What is the most professionally responsible approach to managing this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough pilot test of the proposed optimization on a small, controlled segment of the workflow, gathering data on efficiency gains, potential disruptions, and client impact before a full-scale rollout. Option B. Immediately implement the proposed optimization across the entire workflow to demonstrate responsiveness to the client's request and achieve the promised efficiency gains as quickly as possible. Option C. Defer the evaluation and implementation of the process optimization indefinitely, prioritizing the stability of current operations and avoiding any potential for client dissatisfaction due to changes. Option D. Escalate the disagreement among team members and the potential for disruption to senior management for a decision, without conducting any further analysis or testing of the proposed optimization. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough pilot test of the proposed optimization on a small, controlled segment of the workflow, gathering data on efficiency gains, potential disruptions, and client impact before a full-scale rollout. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization where a team identifies a potential improvement but faces resistance due to perceived disruption and a lack of immediate, quantifiable benefits. The professional challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency with the need for stakeholder buy-in, change management, and adherence to established operational procedures. The urgency of the client's request adds pressure, requiring a swift yet thorough evaluation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, data-driven validation of the proposed process optimization. This aligns with best professional practices by prioritizing a systematic assessment before implementation. It demonstrates due diligence, ensuring that the proposed changes are not only theoretically sound, but also practically viable and beneficial. This methodical approach minimizes risks of unintended consequences, wasted resources, and client dissatisfaction. It also fosters trust and transparency by involving relevant stakeholders in the validation process, addressing concerns proactively and building consensus. This aligns with principles of good governance and operational excellence, ensuring that changes are implemented responsibly and effectively. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing the change immediately without thorough validation is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses critical risk assessment and quality control. This could lead to operational disruptions, client service degradation, and potential breaches of service-level agreements, which are often governed by contractual obligations and regulatory expectations for service delivery. It disregards the potential for unforeseen negative impacts on other processes or systems. Focusing solely on the client's immediate request and deferring the optimization evaluation indefinitely is also professionally unsound. While client satisfaction is paramount, neglecting opportunities for systemic improvement can lead to long-term inefficiencies, increased operational costs, and a decline in competitive advantage. It fails to uphold the professional responsibility to continuously seek and implement improvements that benefit both the client and the organization. Escalating the issue without attempting any initial validation or data gathering is premature. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should be based on a reasoned assessment of the situation, not as a first resort. This approach can be perceived as an avoidance of responsibility and can overburden management with issues that could have been resolved at a lower level, potentially delaying necessary improvements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the current state, identifying potential improvements, and then rigorously validating these improvements through pilot testing, data analysis, and stakeholder consultation. This involves a phased approach. Define, measure, analyze, improve, and control DMAIC principles, even if not explicitly named. When faced with resistance, the decision-making process should involve clear communication of the proposed benefits, addressing concerns with evidence, and demonstrating a commitment to minimizing disruption. If validation proves the optimization is beneficial, a well-planned implementation strategy, including change management and training, should be developed. If validation reveals issues, the process should be iterated or alternative solutions explored. Escalation should be reserved for situations where consensus cannot be reached or significant risks cannot be mitigated through standard procedures. Question 15. The performance metrics show a significant increase in call handling efficiency following a recent system update designed to streamline agent workflows, but customer satisfaction scores have simultaneously declined, with an uptick in complaints related to unresolved issues. Option A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the entire customer interaction process, from initial contact to issue resolution, to identify the root cause of the decline in customer satisfaction and its link to the workflow changes. Option B. Focus on further technical enhancements to the system to address the specific technical issues customers are reporting, assuming the workflow efficiency gains are the primary objective. Option C. Attribute the decline in customer satisfaction to external factors and continue with the current workflow, as the primary goal of increased efficiency has been met. Option D. Implement additional training for agents on handling difficult customers, without investigating the underlying process or system issues contributing to the complaints. Correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the entire customer interaction process, from initial contact to issue resolution, to identify the root cause of the decline in customer satisfaction and its link to the workflow changes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization where a seemingly minor change, intended to improve efficiency, has unintended negative consequences on customer satisfaction. The professional challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with the paramount importance of customer experience, especially within a regulated environment where customer complaints can have significant repercussions. The need for careful judgment arises from the interconnectedness of process steps and their impact on various stakeholders. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a holistic review of the entire customer journey, not just the specific process step being optimized. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing customer outcomes. In a regulated environment, this proactive approach helps identify and mitigate potential compliance risks associated with customer dissatisfaction, such as breaches of service-level agreements or regulatory requirements related to customer care. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical service delivery and customer centricity, which are often implicitly or explicitly mandated by industry guidelines and consumer protection laws. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on the cost reduction aspect of the process change, ignoring the customer feedback. This represents a failure to adhere to ethical principles of fair dealing and customer welfare. It could also lead to regulatory breaches if the customer dissatisfaction escalates to formal complaints that trigger investigations into service quality or adherence to consumer protection regulations. Another incorrect approach involves implementing further technical changes to the system without understanding the root cause of the customer dissatisfaction. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply a systematic problem-solving methodology. Ethically, it shows a disregard for the impact of technology on human experience and could violate guidelines that require processes to be designed with user impact in mind. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the customer feedback as isolated incidents without proper investigation. This is a significant ethical failure, as it neglects the responsibility to address legitimate concerns and can lead to a systemic erosion of trust. From a regulatory standpoint, ignoring customer complaints can be seen as a failure to comply with reporting or complaint handling procedures, potentially leading to penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured problem-solving framework that begins with clearly defining the problem, gathering data from multiple sources, including performance metrics and customer feedback, analyzing the root cause, developing and evaluating potential solutions, implementing the chosen solution, and then monitoring its effectiveness. This iterative process ensures that optimizations are sustainable and do not compromise core values or regulatory compliance. Question 16. The performance metrics show a consistent but slowing rate of improvement in key operational indicators over the past 2 quarters, suggesting that current optimization efforts are yielding diminishing returns. Option A. Prioritize immediate cost reduction initiatives by streamlining resources, even if it means reducing the scope of certain operational activities. Option B. Maintain current operational procedures and focus on incremental adjustments to existing workflows to sustain the observed performance levels. Option C. Implement a significant, untested technological overhaul of the entire system to force a breakthrough in performance. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive root cause analysis of the current process, including detailed process mapping and stakeholder interviews, to identify underlying inefficiencies and potential areas for innovation. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive root cause analysis of the current process, including detailed process mapping and stakeholder interviews, to identify underlying inefficiencies and potential areas for innovation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where initial improvements yield diminishing returns, leading to a plateau in performance. The professional challenge lies in identifying the root cause of this stagnation and selecting an appropriate strategy for further enhancement without disrupting existing successful operations or incurring excessive costs. It requires a nuanced understanding of process dynamics and a strategic approach to problem solving. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a deeper dive into the process, moving beyond superficial metrics to understand the underlying mechanisms. This includes detailed process mapping, root cause analysis of bottlenecks, and potentially exploring innovative solutions or leveraging new technologies. This represents best professional practice because it is data-driven, systematic, and aims for sustainable, significant improvement rather than incremental, potentially unsustainable gains. It aligns with principles of continuous improvement and operational excellence, which are often implicitly or explicitly encouraged by organizational guidelines focused on efficiency and effectiveness. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply accept the plateau and maintain the status quo. This fails to uphold professional responsibility for driving ongoing improvement and could lead to competitive disadvantage. Ethically, it might be seen as a dereliction of duty to optimize resources and performance. Another incorrect approach would be to implement drastic, untested changes without thorough analysis. This risks introducing new problems, disrupting stable operations, and potentially violating internal change management protocols or even external regulatory requirements if the process involves regulated activities. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to manage risk effectively. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on cost-cutting measures without addressing the underlying process inefficiencies. While cost reduction is important, it can lead to a decline in quality or service if not carefully managed and can mask deeper issues that prevent true optimization. This approach prioritizes short-term financial gains over long-term operational health and customer satisfaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization by first establishing a clear understanding of current performance and identifying areas for improvement. When performance plateaus, the next step is to conduct a thorough diagnostic to uncover the root causes, employing methodologies like Lean or Six Sigma principles. This diagnostic phase should inform the selection of appropriate interventions, which could range from minor adjustments to significant re-engineering. The decision-making process should prioritize solutions that are sustainable, scalable, and aligned with organizational goals, while also considering potential risks and regulatory compliance. Question 17. Regulatory review indicates that a company is seeking to streamline its customer onboarding process to reduce processing times and improve customer satisfaction. While exploring automation and workflow simplification, the project team is considering a new data collection method that gathers more granular customer information than currently required by existing internal policies. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional best practices for process optimization in this context? Option A. Proceed with the new data collection method, focusing solely on the efficiency gains, and address any potential regulatory concerns only if they are raised by an external auditor or regulatory body. Option B. Rely on the discretion of the project lead to interpret existing policies and make a judgment call on the legality of the new data collection method, prioritizing speed of implementation. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of all relevant data privacy regulations and internal data governance policies to determine if the proposed data collection method is compliant before proceeding with any implementation. Option D. Implement the new data collection method immediately to gather richer data, assuming that more data is always better for future analysis, and that internal policies will be updated retrospectively to accommodate the change. Correct answer is D. Implement the new data collection method immediately to gather richer data, assuming that more data is always better for future analysis, and that internal policies will be updated retrospectively to accommodate the change. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of efficiency gains through process optimization with the imperative to maintain compliance with regulatory requirements. Pressure to demonstrate tangible improvements can lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical compliance steps, which can have severe consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure that optimization efforts do not inadvertently create new risks or violate established rules. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding of the existing regulatory landscape before implementing any changes. This proactive stance ensures that all optimization initiatives are designed with compliance as a foundational element, rather than an afterthought. By integrating regulatory considerations from the outset, the organization mitigates the risk of non-compliance, avoids potential fines, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. This aligns with the ethical duty of professionals to act with due diligence and to uphold the integrity of the organization's operations within the legal framework. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without adequate regulatory assessment is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the implementation of processes that, while efficient on paper, violate data privacy regulations, consumer protection laws, or industry-specific compliance mandates. Such a failure represents a significant ethical lapse, demonstrating a disregard for legal obligations and potentially exposing the organization to substantial penalties and loss of trust. Another incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about regulatory requirements without verification is equally problematic. This demonstrates a lack of professional rigor and can result in unintended noncompliance. As regulatory frameworks are often nuanced and require precise interpretation, the professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the objectives of the process optimization. Second, conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable regulatory frameworks relevant to the processes being optimized. Third, engage with compliance and legal experts to validate any assumptions and to identify potential regulatory impacts of proposed changes. Fourth, design and implement optimization strategies with built-in compliance checks and balances. Finally, establish ongoing monitoring mechanisms to ensure continued adherence to regulations post-implementation. Question 18. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of current operational workflows to identify areas for improvement. When faced with pressure to reduce operational costs, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with maintaining service quality and compliance? Option A. Focus solely on eliminating non-essential customer-facing interactions to reduce the time spent on each customer, regardless of the impact on customer satisfaction. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive process mapping exercise to identify inefficiencies, bottlenecks, and redundant steps, followed by a data-driven analysis to prioritize optimization initiatives that have the greatest impact on cost and quality, involving key stakeholders in the design and implementation of changes. Option C. Implement a new, unproven software solution across all departments to automate tasks without extensive user training or pilot testing. Option D. Immediately reduce the number of staff in key operational areas to lower labor costs, assuming that remaining employees can absorb the workload. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive process mapping exercise to identify inefficiencies, bottlenecks, and redundant steps, followed by a data-driven analysis to prioritize optimization initiatives that have the greatest impact on cost and quality, involving key stakeholders in the design and implementation of changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost reduction with the long-term implications for operational efficiency and customer satisfaction. The pressure to demonstrate quick wins can lead to short-sighted decisions that undermine sustainable process improvement. Careful judgment is required to identify optimization opportunities that deliver tangible benefits without compromising quality or compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a data-driven, holistic review of existing processes. By mapping the current state, identifying bottlenecks, and engaging stakeholders, it ensures that proposed changes are well-informed and address root causes rather than symptoms. This aligns with principles of continuous improvement and operational excellence, which are often implicitly or explicitly valued in professional environments. Furthermore, it fosters a culture of transparency and collaboration, essential for successful change management and adherence to any relevant internal policies or industry best practices that govern operational efficiency and service delivery. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on headcount reduction without analyzing the impact on workflow or service levels is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to increased workload for remaining staff, potential errors, and a decline in service quality, which may violate service-level agreements or customer charter commitments. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing unproven technology without adequate testing or training risks operational disruption, data integrity issues, and potential noncompliance with data protection regulations if customer data is mishandled. A third incorrect approach that bypasses stakeholder consultation and implements changes unilaterally can lead to resistance, decreased morale, and the overlooking of critical operational nuances, potentially resulting in processes that are technically optimized but practically unworkable, thereby failing to meet business objectives and potentially contravening internal change management protocols. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem and objectives. This should be followed by a thorough analysis of the current state, involving data collection and stakeholder input. Potential solutions should then be evaluated based on their feasibility, impact, and alignment with strategic goals and any applicable regulatory or ethical guidelines. Finally, a pilot or phased implementation, coupled with continuous monitoring and feedback, allows for iterative refinement and ensures that the chosen optimization strategy is effective and sustainable. Question 19. Process analysis reveals a customer service representative receives a request from a representative of a long-standing client company to access a summary of a specific customer's interaction history with the service provider. The customer service representative knows the client company and has interacted with their representatives before, but has not received explicit permission from the end customer to share their interaction data with this client company. What is the most appropriate action to take? Option A. Escalate the request to a supervisor to determine if the client representative's authority is sufficient to bypass the need for end customer consent. Option B. Politely inform the client representative that explicit consent from the end customer is required before any personal interaction data can be shared, and offer to assist in obtaining that consent. Option C. Share the customer's interaction history with the client representative, as they are a known and trusted client. Option D. Provide a general overview of the types of interactions the customer has had without disclosing specific details to satisfy the client's request. The correct answer is B. Politely inform the client representative that explicit consent from the end customer is required before any personal interaction data can be shared, and offer to assist in obtaining that consent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in customer service operations where a client's request, while seemingly straightforward, could have unintended consequences for data privacy and regulatory compliance. The professional challenge lies in balancing the client's immediate desire for information with the absolute priority of adhering to data protection laws. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for reputational damage and legal penalties if data is mishandled. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes obtaining explicit, documented consent from the customer before sharing any personal information, even with a known client. This aligns with the fundamental principles of data protection regulations, such as the UK GDPR, which mandate that personal data processing must have a lawful basis, and consent is a key lawful basis. Obtaining explicit consent ensures that the individual is fully aware of what information is being shared, with whom, and for what purpose, thereby respecting their autonomy and privacy rights. This proactive measure is best professional practice as it mitigates risk and builds trust. Incorrect approach is analysis. Sharing the information without explicit consent, even if the request comes from a known client representative, is a direct violation of data protection principles. This could be considered a breach of the UK GDPR, specifically Article 5 regarding lawful and fair processing, and Article 6 concerning the conditions for lawful processing. It fails to establish a valid lawful basis for processing the data in this instance. Providing a summary of the customer's interaction history without verifying the requester's authority or obtaining consent from the customer themselves is also a breach. This could lead to unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, violating the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation if the information is not strictly necessary for the client's stated purpose, and if the customer has not consented to such disclosure. Escalating the request to a supervisor without first attempting to obtain customer consent or clarifying the requester's authorization is an inefficient and potentially risky approach. While escalation can be a part of process, it bypasses the primary responsibility of the individual handling the data to ensure compliance before involving others, potentially delaying a compliant resolution and exposing the organization to unnecessary risk if the supervisor is not fully aware of the specific data protection requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, always defaulting to the highest standard of data protection. When faced with a request involving personal data, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the type of data involved and its sensitivity. 2. Determining the lawful basis for processing that data. 3. If consent is the basis, ensuring it is explicit, informed, and freely given. 4. Verifying the identity and authority of the requester. 5. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made. In situations of doubt, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is paramount. Question 20. Implementation of a new candidate assessment platform requires access to historical performance data from various internal systems. The project manager is under significant time pressure to launch the platform. Which approach best balances the need for timely implementation with regulatory compliance and stakeholder interests? Option A. Focus solely on migrating data that is easily accessible and appears relevant, deferring any complex data validation or compliance checks until after the platform launch to meet the deadline. Option B. Rely on informal assurances from the sales team that the data is clean and proceed with a direct data dump from the most accessible legacy system, assuming all necessary permissions are implicitly granted. Option C. Prioritize a phased integration approach, working closely with IT security, legal, and compliance teams to define data access protocols, ensure data anonymization where appropriate, and obtain necessary approvals before accessing and migrating historical data. Option D. Directly integrate the new platform with legacy systems, pulling raw candidate data without prior anonymization or explicit consent to expedite the data migration process. The correct answer is D. Directly integrate the new platform with legacy systems, pulling raw candidate data without prior anonymization or explicit consent to expedite the data migration process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a critical project with the long-term implications of stakeholder satisfaction and regulatory compliance. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that might compromise data integrity or violate established data privacy principles, which are paramount in the financial services sector. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of trust and adherence to legal frameworks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, compliant, and transparent method for data handling. By engaging with all relevant stakeholders, including IT security, legal, and compliance teams, the project manager ensures that the implementation adheres to the Concentrix hiring assessment test regulatory framework, which likely emphasizes data protection, accuracy, and auditability. This proactive engagement mitigates risks, builds consensus, and ensures that the solution is not only functional but also legally sound and ethically defensible. An incorrect approach that bypasses established data governance protocols and directly accesses sensitive candidate information without proper authorization or anonymization is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to breaches of data privacy regulations, e.g., GDPR if applicable to the exam's jurisdiction, or equivalent local data protection laws, resulting in severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of candidate trust. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or informal agreements from a single stakeholder, without formal validation or documented approval from all relevant parties, fails to establish a robust audit trail and can lead to misinterpretations or oversights of critical compliance requirements. This undermines the principle of accountability and can expose the organization to legal challenges. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their concerns. This is followed by a thorough review of the applicable regulatory framework and internal policies. Next, potential approaches are evaluated against these requirements, prioritizing those that ensure compliance, data integrity, and stakeholder alignment. Open communication, documentation of decisions, and seeking expert advice from legal and compliance departments are crucial steps in navigating complex implementation scenarios.